Have you ever felt a phantom itch on your skin? That annoying, subtle tickle that makes you scratch your arm, assuming it's just a loose hair or a trick of your mind. Most of the time, it's nothing. But sometimes, your mind isn't playing tricks on you. Sometimes, you are actively being hunted by things too small to see, until it's way too late. My name is Ethan. This happened a few years ago during the peak of my college midterms. I was a complete wreck, operating on maybe 2 hours of sleep a night, living alone in a cramped, cheap studio apartment in upstate New York. The walls were thin, the rent was low, and the ceiling had this old, water-damaged drywall that the landlord always promised to fix but never did. It was a Friday night, somewhere around 2:30 a.m. I had been sitting at my desk for nearly 12 hours straight, staring at my dual-monitor setup, fueled entirely by black coffee and energy drinks. My eyes were bloodshot, and my brain felt like fried mush. Around 3 a.m., I felt a faint, delicate tickle on my left forearm. Without looking away from my screen, I casually brushed it off with my right hand, assuming it was just dust or a stray hair. 5 minutes later, the same sensation crept up my neck. I rubbed my neck, took another sip of lukewarm coffee, and kept typing. But then, the itching became persistent. It wasn't just one spot anymore. It was on my arms, the back of my hands, and grazing along the edge of my collarbone. I sighed, muttering to myself. I figured I was finally losing it, experiencing some kind of sleep deprivation-induced hallucination. You know, the kind of paranoia that makes you think bugs are crawling under your skin when you've had too much caffeine and zero sleep. I stopped typing and finally turned my gaze down to my left arm. In the dim, harsh glow of my computer screen, I froze. My heart skipped a beat. There, crawling slowly across my pale skin, were 3 tiny, translucent spiders. They were barely the size of a pinhead, but their long, spindly legs were unmistakable. What the hell? I whispered, smacking my arm violently to crush them. I looked at my desk. Another one was traversing across my mousepad. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. But then, as I looked up into the space between my face and the monitors, I saw it. Glistening faintly in the bright LED backlighting were thin, microscopic silver threads. Strands of spider silk, hanging vertically in midair. And floating down those strands, slowly and silently, were dozens of tiny, dark specks. They were dropping from the ceiling. I slowly craned my neck upward. Directly above my desk chair was that old, cracked water-damaged spot in the drywall. Only now, there was a dark, ragged hole about the size of a quarter right in the center of it. Panic completely overrode my exhaustion. I stood up so fast my chair flipped backward, crashing into the floor. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and aimed the beam straight at the hole. What I saw made my stomach instantly turn. The edges of the hole were completely lined with thick, matted white webbing. And inside the darkness of the ceiling cavity, something was moving. It looked like a living, breathing mass of dark shadow, shifting and undulating. Determined to put an end to it before I went to sleep, I ran to the kitchen cupboard and grabbed a heavy-duty can of Raid chemical bug spray. I marched back into the bedroom, stepped onto my flipped-over desk chair, held my breath, and pressed the nozzle. I blasted the chemical stream directly inside the hole for 5 solid seconds. That was the biggest mistake of my life. For a second, there was dead silence. Then, a faint, sickening rustling sound echoed from inside the ceiling, like the sound of thousands of dry autumn leaves being crushed together. Before I could step down, they began to pour out. It wasn't a few dozen. It was a torrential, living waterfall. Hundreds, no, thousands of tiny, newly hatched spiders came erupting out of the hole, desperate to escape the toxic fumes. They fell in massive, clumping clusters straight down. Because I was standing directly underneath, the entire wave hit me. They rained down onto my face, tangled instantly into my hair, and poured down the inside of my loose t-shirt. I could feel thousands of microscopic, prickling legs scrambling frantically all over my skin, biting out of sheer panic. I let out a choked, horrific scream, dropping the spray can. I tore at my clothes, ripping my shirt off as I stumbled blindly toward the bathroom. I slapped wildly at my own face, feeling the tiny bodies crushing against my cheeks and forehead. I slammed into the shower, turning the water on full blast to freezing cold, desperate to wash the nightmare off my skin. Even now, years later, I can't sit under an open ceiling vent or a crack in the drywall without checking it every 5 minutes. The itching never truly goes away. Think about how many times you've blindly reached your hand into a dark, unseen corner. Under the couch, behind the nightstand, or beneath your bed, searching for a dropped phone or a charger cable. We do it carelessly, trusting that the darkness is empty. But the darkness is never truly empty. It's a sanctuary for things that prefer to live right beneath you, waiting for your hand to slide right into their home. My name is Tyler, and this happened during my sophomore year of high school while living with my parents in Ohio. My bedroom was in the basement, which was partially finished, but always had that damp, slightly cool atmosphere that creepy crawlies seem to love. I had a heavy wooden bed frame that sat low to the carpet, leaving only about a 5-inch gap between the floor and the baseboards. It was a Tuesday night, well past midnight, and I had just finished sneakily playing video games late into the night. My phone battery icon was flashing red, sitting at a critical 2%. I knew that if my phone died, my morning alarm wouldn't go off, and my dad would kill me if I missed the school bus again. The only outlet near my bed was awkwardly positioned directly underneath the heavy wooden headboard. To plug anything in, you had to lie flat on your stomach and slide your arm blindly into the dark, narrow gap beneath the bed. Exhausted and barely keeping my eyes open, I dropped onto the mattress, leaned over the edge, and pushed my right arm deep into the darkness under the bed. I swiped my hand left and right along the carpet, trying to feel for the plastic texture of my iPhone charging brick. As I swept my hand further back, near the dusty baseboard, my fingers brushed against something strange. It wasn't hard plastic, and it wasn't a dust bunny. It felt like a soft, squishy, slightly leathery sack. It was roughly the size of a golf ball, suspended just off the carpet, stuck to the underside of the wooden bed frame. Curious, and completely unaware, I pinched it between my thumb and index finger. I gave it a gentle squeeze to see if it was some old piece of trash or foam packing material. It felt strangely fragile, like a thin balloon filled with tiny, packed grains of sand. Suddenly, I felt a sharp, collective pop break under my fingers. Within a millisecond, an overwhelming, horrifying sensation exploded across my hand. It felt like a burst of tiny, microscopic needles pricking my skin simultaneously. Before my brain could even process what was happening, I felt hundreds of fast, frantic, prickly little legs moving in unison, racing upward from my fingertips, over my knuckles, and sprinting directly up my wrist. A primal wave of absolute terror hit me. I violently yanked my arm out from under the bed and threw myself backward onto the mattress, screaming at the top of my lungs. I flipped on my bedside lamp, my chest heaving, and looked at my right arm. My skin crawled so violently I thought I was going to vomit. My entire hand, wrist, and halfway up my forearm was completely blanketed by a swarming army of freshly ruptured, pale gray baby spiders. There were easily 30 to 40 of them on my skin, scattering frantically up toward my elbow, while dozens more were spilling out from the dark void beneath the bed frame onto the carpet that I scrambled out of bed like a madman, shaking my arm violently, slapping at my skin until my forearm was red and bruised. I ran up the basement stairs into the main bathroom, turned the shower on scalding hot, and scrubbed my arm with a loofah until I was practically bleeding, crying out of pure disgust. Hearing my screams, my dad came running down to the basement with a flashlight to see what the hell was wrong. When he shone the beam under my bed, he found the deflated, torn remains of a massive wolf spider egg sac stuck to the wood. But that wasn't the worst part. Right next to the ruptured sack, lurking in the deep corner behind the headboard, was the mother. A monstrous, dark brown wolf spider, easily the size of a teacup saucer, guarding what was left of her nest. Her eyes glinted like tiny beads in the flashlight beam before she darted into the wall joists. We had to fumigate the entire basement the next day. Needless to say, I moved my bed to the exact center of the room, and I never, ever reached my hand under another piece of furniture again. The bedroom is supposed to be your ultimate safe haven. A place where you can close your eyes, lower your guard, and succumb to sleep. But what do you do when your safe haven is compromised? What do you do when you wake up to a heavy, creeping weight on your chest, only to convince yourself it was just a nightmare, until the exact same nightmare returns the next night, and the night after that. My name is Marcus. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and I'm not easily frightened. I don't believe in ghosts, and I love horror movies. But what happened to me over a span of 3 days in the summer of 2024 completely broke my psychological sense of security. It started on a humid Thursday night. I woke up abruptly at 3:15 a.m. from a deep, dreamless sleep. My room was pitch black. The reason I woke up wasn't a sound, it was a sensation. I felt a distinct, heavy, rhythmic weight crawling slowly across my left thigh, right over the thin top sheet of my blanket. It felt too heavy to be a common house bug. It felt substantial, like a small rodent or a heavy hand slowly dragging its fingers across my leg. Still half asleep and disoriented, panic shot through my nervous system. I leaped out of bed in one violent motion, fumbling in the dark for my light switch. I flipped it on, my heart pounding in my throat, and yanked the covers completely off the mattress with a heavy sweep of my arm. Nothing. The white sheets were completely bare. I checked the floor, under the pillows, and around the nightstand. There was absolutely nothing there. I sighed heavily, rubbing my face. I convinced myself it was just a vivid hypnagogic hallucination, a waking dream brought on by the intense summer heat and dehydration. I drank a glass of water and went back to sleep. The next night, Friday, it happened again. Exactly at 3:30 a.m., I snapped awake. This time, the sensation was much worse. The heavy, creeping weight wasn't on my leg anymore. It was on my bare right bicep. I could feel thick, bristly, hairy appendages deliberately gripping my skin, moving with a slow, mechanical precision upward toward my shoulder. I froze in absolute, paralyzing terror for 2 seconds before screaming out. I leaped out of bed like a lunatic, shaking my arm wildly. I ran out of my room, down the hallway, and practically kicked my dad's bedroom door open. My dad, waking up confused, grabbed a heavy flashlight and came into my room. He was always the practical, fearless guy who handled everything. He completely stripped my bed, pulled the mattress away from the wall, and checked every square inch of the frame. Again, there was absolutely nothing. "Marcus, you're just stressed out, man. It's a recurring nightmare," my dad said, patting my shoulder before heading back to bed. I felt foolish. I felt like I was losing my mind. I slept on the living room couch for the rest of that night. By Saturday night, I told myself to grow up. I was an adult. It was just a mind trick. I went back to sleep in my own bed, leaving a small closet light on so the room wouldn't be completely dark. Around 4 a.m., the nightmare returned for its grand finale. I woke up, but this time, the weight was resting directly on my chest. It felt like a heavy, cold brick pressing down on my lungs. In the dim, ambient light spilling from the closet, I slowly opened my eyes and looked down at my own torso. My throat completely locked up. I couldn't even scream. Sitting right in the center of my chest was the most monstrous, horrific creature I had ever seen in my life. It was a giant, jet-black arachnid, easily larger than a massive tarantula, covered in thick, coarse hairs. Its multifaceted eyes caught the dim light, staring directly up at my face. The weight I had felt over the last 3 nights wasn't a dream. It had been hunting me while I slept, getting closer and closer to my face each night. The sheer primal terror gave me a sudden burst of adrenaline. I threw my chest upward with a violent gasp and flung the heavy comforter over it. As I scrambled backward against the headboard, I watched the massive spider drop off my body onto the mattress. It didn't scurry away like a normal insect. It moved with terrifying speed, its long, muscular legs clicking against the fabric as it sprinted across the sheets, dove off the edge of the bed, and vanished into the dark void beneath my dresser. I ran out of that room and never slept in it again. We hired a professional exterminator the next morning, but they never found it. They told me it was likely an exotic, invasive huntsman or a rogue pet that had escaped from a neighbor's house. To this day, I sleep with a fully lit room, and every single night before I close my eyes, I pull my bed completely away from the walls, terrified that the multi-night visitor is waiting for me to lower my guard once again.